Howdy everyone, and welcome back to The More You Grow. We're back out at the farm again today. We're going to be planting some more stuff out in the garden, and today we're going to be planting America's probably favorite plant to put in the home garden. We're going to be talking about tomatoes today, and I've got a few tips and tricks that I have on starting awesome tomatoes out in the garden. Some of these you may have heard of, some of them you may not have, but you're going to see them all right here on the channel today. So let's go talk about my secrets to starting stronger tomatoes. Let's go check it out. All right, so the first thing that's going to be really important in growing good tomatoes in your garden is choosing good tomatoes to start with. You can either start your own at home and really grow them the way that you want. That's what I always recommend to people. If you got the space and the time, start your own tomatoes because you can get the variety that you want and you can really get them to the size and quality that you want. Sometimes at garden centers and greenhouses, they can be either on the wimpy side, they might be too small, they might be kind of sickly, they might not be getting watered well enough. The list goes on. So choosing the right tomatoes is going to be a big deal. And what I have here is an example of what you might see at something like a garden center. This didn't come from a garden center. These are just ones that got left in a 6-pack a little too long. So you may see something like this at your garden center. And this is going to be okay. I actually like to get long, lanky tomatoes. Some people would say, oh my gosh, you can't grow those because they're just going to break. Well, I'm going to show you my #1 secret to growing good tomatoes, and it requires having some tall tomatoes. We'll get to that in a minute. That's going to be the biggest one in this video, so I want to save that towards the middle or the end. The first thing I want to show people is, see how this one already has flowers on it? Well, what I do, the first thing I do before I plant any tomatoes is I go in there and pinch these flowers off. I know what you're thinking. Why would I do that? That just made it to where I'm going to get tomatoes later now. Well, the big deal is you don't want to have flowers on your tomatoes too much. It's okay to have a few. You really don't want them to focus on flowering right now. You want them to focus on growing more leaves, getting bigger, and getting good roots. And it can't focus on that when it's trying to focus on reproduction. So pinching those flowers off, it's going to help it to redirect its energy to where it needs to go, towards the roots and towards growing a bigger plant. So there's plenty of time for flowers later on in the season. You're still gonna have time for tomatoes, but we don't want them to focus on too many things at once. It's kind of like us. If we got 5, 6 different things going on, we really can't focus our attention on any one of them. So plants are the same way. The only reason these are flowering out right now is because they're a little cramped in their pots. They think that they're not gonna have any more space and that they gotta hurry up and focus on making some fruit because they think that this is as best it's gonna get. And we're gonna give them a new home out here in the field. So we don't want them focusing on these flowers just yet. So they will start to focus on leaves and roots now, and we're gonna be good to go. So let me show you the next step, and this is gonna be the biggest step that I have in growing successful tomatoes. So let's go check that out. All right guys, so here is my big secret to growing stronger tomatoes. It's burying them deep. I know that sounds crazy. Most of the time people just put them at the soil surface, they put a cage around them, which I'm gonna do in another video. I'm gonna build my own cages and show you how to do that. But in this video, we're gonna be talking about how I get these started. The first thing I do is I bury them deep, or I will bury them all the way up most of the stem. And I know that sounds a little weird, but what this is gonna do is, if I plant this one sideways, which I'm gonna do since it's so long and tall, if I plant this up about 2/3 up the stem, this whole stem is gonna root out. This is all gonna become roots up here. And look at that, you've got another foot of roots that this is gonna be able to take up water with, it's gonna be able to take up nutrients with it, and it's going to make this stronger because what happens is, we're gonna put this in like so, sideways, at an angle. We're not gonna plant it all the way underneath. We're not gonna bury the leaves. We're gonna tilt it, but we're gonna bury it up about 2/3 up the stem. And so what's gonna happen is when we bury it like that, the stem is gonna find the sun again. It's gonna find the center of gravity and it's going to stand up. It's going to curve back up and start pointing up again. So the base will be up here once it's buried. So this will become the new base of the tomato plant. And all this down here will become roots. So all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go down here, we're going to start covering this in like so. And like I said, we're going to do this at an angle. We're not going to make it all the way flat. We're going to kind of tilt it up a little bit so that way we keep these leaves up at the top of the soil. We don't want to bury the whole thing. We just want to bury about 2/3 up the stem. And so it'll look something like this. And don't worry, because this will stand back up. This will start to curve up like so, and it will become the new base. You'll not even know that all this is buried under here if you didn't do it yourself. So we've got it like this. We're going to leave about 2/3 of it, or we're going to leave about 1/3 of it above the surface of the soil, and that will become the new base. One other big benefit of planting these tomatoes this way is that we don't have to worry about them breaking now. Because if I planted this tomato, as long and lanky as it is, above the ground, it's most likely it would break if we didn't support it somehow. So by planting it this way, it gives it time for it to build that structure, and now it's not 1.5 feet tall. It's about 10 inches or less tall, and that can be very easy to support. Once it starts to grow back up, it's going to be strong enough to stand up on its own. We don't have to worry about this stem breaking way down here. So I'm going to come down here, we're going to keep planting some more, and I'm going to show you a different way that you can deep plant your tomatoes. Alright, so we're going to do these sets of tomatoes a little bit differently, because one, they're not as long and lanky. If they're not as long and lanky as those are, you don't have to lay them sideways. But if they're really tall, I lay them sideways because I can't very well bury them all the way 1.5 feet down in the ground. I could, but that's going to be a lot more work. But these are a little bit shorter, but I'm still going to use my deep plant method. But instead of planting them sideways, we're going to plant them straight up and down, but we're going to plant them about halfway up the stem to the bottom sets of leaves. I pinched off 2 sets of leaves here, and we're going to plant them to about a few inches below the first set of leaves, right about where my fingers are. The thing that I didn't do, or I didn't show with the other tomatoes, is I take a little bit of vegetable and tomato fertilizer and I put it at the bottom of the hole. And that's just going to give it a good little boost for when it takes off. And I got this at, I don't remember where I got this, but it's just a vegetable tomato fertilizer. It's pretty cheap stuff. So you can use an organic fertilizer if you want. That's perfectly fine. I just happened to grab this because it had the right balance that I wanted. It was pretty inexpensive and it was easy to get. I will start fertilizing these though with things like fish emulsion. I will give them things like Medina. I'll show you what that is later on. I'm just giving it some inorganic fertilizer right now just because this is a little bit faster acting. It's going to be there readily available right the moment those roots get to it. It doesn't have to break down like an organic fertilizer does. And I'm not talking about certified organic or synthetic or anything like that. I'm talking about organic and inorganic. So organic means from a living source such as compost, things like that, fish emulsion. Inorganic means the mineralized version of that nutrient. So this is just ammonia, phosphate, and it is potash, which is just the mineralized version of that. That's what the plants can take up right now. If it's an organic version, that's perfectly fine, but it takes time for that to break down into its inorganic state where the plants can take it up. So I'm using this right now, but I will come in when we get the drip irrigation in. I'll use things like fish emulsion, Medina, which is a liquid fertilizer, and I'll be able to run it into the drip irrigation. And I'm going to show that once we get it put in. That's going to be a whole video. But for this video right now, let me show you how I deep plant vertically. So you want to size up your hole just about right. So this one's going to need a little bit of fill in on it, but we'll put that in right about there and we will cover it up. You want to try to get it straight up and down if you're going to plant it vertically, but you'll see that I'm going to plant it up the stem a little bit. So somewhere right about like that. And so this tomato, everywhere that the stem is underground now, will become roots. This will root out and give you more roots, you get more water, get more nutrients. It's gonna make it more stable. So it really seems to make these tomatoes take off much faster when you plant them either vertically deeper, or if you lay them horizontally and cover the stems like I did with the other tomatoes. These tomatoes are called better bush, so they're going to be a lot more compact and they're not going to be as trailing, where the other ones were called whopper, and they're an indeterminate. That means they are a vining style tomato. Determinate tomatoes are more bush style tomatoes. So if you're looking for something a little bit more compact, you want to go with a determinate variety. Better bush is a good one. It stays really compact, and it really stays kind of in its own area. It stays within the cage well. If you get an indeterminate like cherry tomatoes or celebrity, your vining style tomatoes, they're going to go over the top of your cages and they're going to trail out in different places. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but just depends on where you're trying to plant your tomatoes and what your goal is. So I'm going to go through here, plant some more of these tomatoes, vertically in this case, and I'll show you what it all looks like when we get done. All right, folks, all we have to do now is we're going to water these in really well. That way they have all the water they need to get started. They'll have nutrients with the fertilizer, and they will have the warmth, sunlight, everything they need to get started. And in the fall, I will pull one of these plants out and show you what the roots look like. You'll be so surprised at how much more roots it has, how much healthier the root system is, and that's just going to mean more water and nutrients for our plants. So until then, if you like this video, be sure to hit that like button. If you have any more questions for me about how I start my tomatoes or anything I did in this video, leave it down in the comments, and also leave any tips you have for how you get your tomatoes started. I'd love to see that. And if you haven't done so yet, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Go check us out on Facebook and Instagram, and hit that bell icon for notifications. So until next time, I hope you'll join me right here on The More You Grow.